The summer of 1866 is burning hot on the northern plains when 500 Lakota warriors crest a ridge overlooking Fort Phil Kearny. The prairie grass bends under a wind that carries the scent of sage and distant buffalo. And for a moment, just one moment, the world still belongs to the horse people as it has for generations. But something is different in the valley below. There, gleaming in the afternoon sun like some metal insect, sits a contraption the warriors have never seen before. 6 bronze barrels arranged in a perfect circle, mounted on a wheeled carriage that looks, well, let's be honest here, it looks ridiculous. The warriors point and laugh. Some joke that it resembles a broken tipi frame. Others suggest the white soldiers have finally lost their minds completely. Young Crazy Horse, he's only about 24 years old at this point, sits his horse among them, studying this strange device with the intensity that will make him legendary. He's already earned his adult name, already proven himself in raids against the Crow and Pawnee. But nothing in his experience as a warrior has prepared him for what's about to happen. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if these history tales fascinate you. Make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Captain Nathaniel Williams of the 27th Infantry stands behind that peculiar metal wagon, his hand resting on a crank handle. Williams is a Civil War veteran who's seen these weapons cut Confederate charges to pieces at Petersburg. He knows what this thing can do. The Lakota warriors don't, not yet. Now think about this scene for a moment. Here you have the collision of 2 completely different concepts of warfare. On that ridge sit warriors from a culture where individual courage determines everything, where touching an enemy with a coup stick brings more honor than killing him from a distance, where battles are personal contests between brave men, where skill with horse and lance and bow matters more than any other factor on earth. And in that valley sits the industrial age's answer to heroism, mechanical, impersonal death delivered at the turn of a crank. Williams gives the order. His gunner, probably sweating despite the afternoon breeze, grips that crank handle and begins to turn. The model 1866 Gatling gun speaks for the first time on the northern plains, and when it speaks, the world listens. 400 rounds scream across the valley in 60 seconds. Now I want you to really imagine this moment. These warriors have heard rifle fire before. The crack of single-shot weapons, the controlled volleys of disciplined soldiers. But this is something else entirely. The mechanical gun doesn't fire in discrete shots. It roars, it chatters. It creates a continuous stream of lead that cuts the prairie grass like an invisible scythe, shatters rocks into fragments, fills the air with a sound that no human ear has ever heard before on these plains. The laughter dies on the warrior's lips. Crazy Horse later described it as hearing the thunder of Wagon. Oh, yet, the thunder beings, but coming from the earth instead of the sky. Other warriors said it sounded like the world tearing apart. The medicine men would later struggle to find words in Lakota for what they had witnessed, because their ancient language had no terms for mechanical death. The grass where the bullet struck looks like it's been trampled by 100 buffalo. Dust and smoke hang in the air, and in the sudden silence that follows, 500 of the finest light cavalry warriors in human history sit their horses and stare at a machine that has just redefined everything they thought they knew about warfare. This is the moment, right here, on this ridge, in the summer of 1866, when an ancient warrior culture built on individual courage meets the Industrial Revolution's solution to combat. And neither side fully understands what they're looking at. Captain Williams, for his part, is probably feeling pretty satisfied. The demonstration worked exactly as intended. The hostiles have seen what American industry can produce, and hopefully they'll think twice about attacking his fort. In his report to headquarters, he'll write about the weapon's effectiveness in overawing the Sioux. Standard military terminology, clinical, neat. But up on that ridge, something far more significant is happening than Williams realizes. Crazy Horse isn't running. He's not overawed, he's studying. He's watching how the weapon operates, noting its limitations. He sees that it has to be positioned on level ground. He notices it can't pursue fleeing warriors. He observes that it seems to jam occasionally, requiring precious seconds to clear. His tactical mind, the same mind that will one day orchestrate the destruction of Custer, is already working on the problem. The other warriors begin to talk among themselves. Some want to charge immediately to test their medicine against this iron thunder. Others counsel retreat, arguing they need time to understand what they've seen. A few of the older men shake their heads and mutter about bad omens, about the prophecies their grandfathers told of a darkness coming from the east. But here's what gets me about this moment, and this is where you really see the character of these people. They don't break. They don't scatter in panic. They sit their horses and they think, these are men whose entire worldview revolves around personal courage in combat. They've built a society where warrior honor is everything, where a man's reputation depends on his willingness to ride into danger. And they've just watched a machine make individual skill irrelevant. But instead of despair, there's adaptation. Instead of surrender, there's analysis. Red Cloud, already in his 40s, and one of the most respected war leaders on the plains, raises his hand for silence. He's been planning his campaign against the Bozeman Trail, the white man's road that cuts through the heart of Lakota hunting grounds. Now he has to factor this new weapon into his calculations. But Red Cloud didn't become the premier strategist of his generation by backing down from challenges. The warriors finally turn their horses and ride back toward their camp, where women and children wait for news. Tonight, around the fires, the storytellers will struggle to describe what they've seen. How do you explain mechanical thunder to people who have never witnessed anything more complex than a rifle? How do you describe the sound of 400 bullets fired in 60 seconds to ears accustomed to the whistle of arrows? The medicine men will speak urgently of disturbing visions, iron demons breathing smoke and lead, the buffalo trails severed by iron roads, a darkness rolling from the east that swallows everything in its path. Some will interpret today's demonstration as confirmation of their worst fears. Others will argue that the spirits are testing the people, preparing them for a great trial, but in the lodges where the warriors gather with their families, where children listen with wide eyes to stories of the metal wagon that speaks thunder, there's no talk of surrender. There's anger, yes, concern, absolutely, but also determination. The Lakota have faced disasters before. Smallpox epidemics that killed half their number, winters so harsh they nearly starved, enemies that seemed too numerous to defeat. Each time they found a way to survive, to adapt, to fight back. The metal wagon has spoken today, but it hasn't had the last word. As night falls over Fort Phil Kearny, Captain Williams cleans and oils his Gatling gun, satisfied with the day's work. In his tent, he writes a report describing the successful demonstration of the weapon's deterrent effect. He mentions the estimated number of hostiles who observed the firing, notes the apparent impact on their morale, recommends increased deployment of such weapons to frontier posts. But 3 miles away, in the Lakota camp, where cook fires flicker like earthbound stars, very different conversations are taking place. Crazy Horse sits with the older warriors, listening to their counsel but forming his own conclusions. He's seen something today that others might have missed. The gunner's face during the demonstration. The man was concentrating intensely, fighting to control the weapon's tendency to jam and overheat. This isn't some mystical device that the whites have summoned from the spirit world. It's a machine built by human hands, operated by men who sweat and worry and make mistakes. If it's a machine, it can be defeated. Not head-on, perhaps. Charging into that stream of bullets would be suicide, and suicide isn't bravery, it's waste. But every machine has weaknesses. Every weapon has limitations. Every tactical problem has a solution, if you're smart enough and patient enough to find it. The wind picks up as the night deepens, carrying with it the eternal sounds of the plains, grass rustling, coyotes calling, the distant buffalo herds moving restlessly under the stars. But tonight, there's something else in that wind, something new and ominous. The echo of mechanical thunder, the smell of gunpowder, the whisper of change that cannot be stopped. In Washington, generals who have just finished using Gatling guns to mow down Confederate charges at places like Cold Harbor and Petersburg are now planning their deployment against a different kind of enemy. An enemy that fights with mobility instead of massed formations, with individual initiative instead of rigid discipline, with courage that borders on the supernatural instead of industrial efficiency. They think they understand what they're dealing with. After all, how different can Indian warfare be from civilized combat? A few demonstrations of superior firepower, a show of American technological might, and surely these primitives will see reason and submit to the inevitable march of progress. They have no idea what they're up against. The Lakota have spent 3 centuries adapting to change. They've transformed themselves from woodland deer hunters into the finest light cavalry on earth. They've learned to use Spanish horses, French guns, English trade goods, all while maintaining their essential identity as a free people. They've built an empire on the grasslands through flexibility, intelligence, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. Now they face their greatest test, not just another enemy tribe or a rival for hunting grounds, but an entire civilization backed by the productive capacity of a continent. Railroads that can move troops and supplies faster than any horse. Telegraph lines that allow coordination across vast distances. Factories that can produce weapons in quantities that would have been unimaginable just decades before. And at the sharp end of all that industrial might, the Gatling gun, Mr. Richard Jordan Gatling's solution to the problem of how to kill large numbers of people efficiently. But here's the thing that the generals in Washington don't understand. The thing that Captain Williams missed entirely in his neat military report. The Lakota aren't planning to fight the industrial age on its own terms. They're going to force it to fight on theirs. The metal wagon has spoken today, filling the air with thunder and smoke and the promise of mechanical death. But tomorrow, when the sun rises over Fort Phil Kearny, it will shine on warriors who are already planning how to make that thunder work against itself. The first encounter is over. The education of both sides has begun, and in the distance, if you know how to listen, you can hear the sound of a much larger storm approaching, one that will test whether courage and adaptability can survive the age of mechanical warfare, whether the horse people can find a way to outlive the very technology that seems designed to destroy them. The metal wagon has had its say. Now it's time to see what the thunder beings have to teach in return. Here's what most people don't understand about the warriors who laughed at that metal wagon in 1866. They weren't always lords of the plains. 3 centuries before Captain Williams cranked his Gatling gun, before Crazy Horse earned his name, before the horse people became the terror of the frontier, the 7 sacred campfires of the Oseti-Sakowin burned quietly in the woodlands of what we now call Minnesota. The people who would one day face mechanical thunder lived then as small bands of deer hunters and wild rice gatherers. They moved on foot through forests of oak and maple, following ancient trails between lakes that reflected the northern lights. Their weapons were bows and stone-tipped lances. Their wealth was measured in birch-bark canoes and winter stores of manumin, wild rice that sustained them through the bitter cold. They had no idea they were about to build an empire. The transformation began with Spanish horses, escapees from Francisco Vasquez de Coronado's expedition of 1542, running wild across the grasslands, multiplying, adapting, creating the great herds that would change everything. By 1700, young Lakota men walked south on vision quests and returned riding these mysterious 4-legged spirits, these sacred dogs that could carry a man faster than the wind. Think about what this meant. Imagine you're a young warrior in 1710, and your grandfather tells you stories of the old days when men hunted deer on foot, when a day's travel was measured in miles instead of dozens of miles, when war parties moved at the speed of running men. Now you can cover more ground in a morning than your ancestors could travel in a week. The entire world has suddenly expanded beyond anything your people ever imagined possible. But here's where it gets really interesting. The horse didn't just provide mobility, it revolutionized everything. Warfare, hunting, trade, the very conception of wealth and status. Within 2 generations, the Lakota transformed from woodland deer hunters into something unprecedented in human history, the most formidable light cavalry force the world had ever seen. Boys learned to ride before they could properly walk. Mothers would strap infants to gentle mares, letting them absorb the rhythm of horse movement before they could even speak. By age 5, children were guiding ponies with knee pressure alone. By 10, they could shoot arrows accurately from horseback at full gallop. By 15, they were warriors who seemed to European observers like centaurs from Greek mythology. Half man, half horse, moving with a unity that defied belief. The warrior societies emerged from this transformation: the kit foxes, the crow owners, the silent eaters, the strong hearts. Each had their own rituals, their own responsibilities, their own role in the elaborate choreography of plains warfare. This wasn't just military organization. It was a complete social system built around mounted combat, where young men proved themselves not just as fighters, but as leaders, as providers, as guardians of their people's way of life. Now here's what made Lakota warfare so different from anything Europeans understood. This was a culture where counting coup, touching an enemy with a stick in battle, brought greater honor than killing him from a distance. Where the greatest warriors were those who rode closest to danger, who took the most risks, who demonstrated courage so absolute it bordered on the supernatural. Picture a typical plains battle before the Gatling gun changed everything. Warriors streaming across the prairie at full gallop, their horses' hooves thundering like a summer storm. Eagle feathers streaming from their hair, war paint bright against bronze skin, lances glittering in the sunlight. They don't fight in formations like European cavalry. Instead, each warrior is an individual artist of violence, using his horse as both weapon and shield, appearing and disappearing like ghosts made of flesh and speed. They developed tactics that would make modern military planners weep with envy. The feigned retreat that drew enemies into ambush. The wheeling charge that struck like lightning and vanished before the enemy could respond. The ability to fight effectively while completely scattered across miles of terrain, coordinating through signals that enemies couldn't detect or understand. But warfare was only part of their transformation. The horse culture created new forms of wealth, new systems of trade, new concepts of leadership. A successful war leader might own hundreds of horses. Imagine that kind of mobile wealth in a world where most people owned nothing more valuable than the clothes on their backs. Warriors could raid enemy camps hundreds of miles away and return with enough horses to make themselves rich beyond their father's dreams. Women controlled this new economy in ways that would shock European observers. They owned the tipis, and when I say owned, I mean owned completely. If a woman divorced her husband, he left with his weapons and horses. Everything else stayed with her. They created art of extraordinary beauty. Porcupine quillwork and beadwork that told stories of family glory, that recorded the deeds of warriors, that transformed everyday objects into masterpieces. The Lakota women also controlled the butchering and distribution of buffalo meat, the preparation of hides that became trade goods worth small fortunes. They were the ones who decided when to move camp, where to set up the tipis, how to arrange the camp circle according to ancient protocols that maintained social harmony. The warrior might bring home the buffalo, but his wife and sisters determined what happened to it afterward. By 1800, the Lakota had mastered not just horsemanship, but the economics of empire. They controlled the best hunting grounds, the Powder River country, the Black Hills, the valleys where buffalo came to winter. They dominated trade routes between the agricultural villages of the Missouri River tribes and the nomadic peoples of the far plains. They built alliance systems that could mobilize thousands of warriors when necessary, while maintaining the flexibility that allowed individual bands to scatter across hundreds of miles when pressure mounted. Here's what made them so successful. They adapted quickly to everything. useful while maintaining their core identity. They adopted the horse, yes, but they made it Lakota. They adopted guns from French and English traders, but they used them in ways no European military manual described. They took metal tools, glass beads, manufactured cloth, but they incorporated these things into a worldview that remained fundamentally their own. This flexibility had been tested before. When smallpox epidemics swept the plains in the 1700s, killing half their number, they rebuilt their societies around the survivors. When drought destroyed the buffalo herds for years at a time, they learned to hunt elk and antelope and trade for corn with the agricultural tribes. When rival nations pressed them from the east, they moved west and conquered new territories, adapting their hunting and warfare techniques to different terrain. Each challenge had made them stronger, more flexible, more confident in their ability to overcome any obstacle. The horse had given them speed and power beyond their ancestors' dreams. Trade had brought them wealth and weapons. Alliance building had given them the ability to mobilize overwhelming force when threatened. They were the undisputed masters of the Great Plains, a nation of warriors who had never known defeat in their own element. The sun dance bound them to the cosmos through sacrifice and pain, ensuring that individual success never came at the expense of tribal welfare. The Vision Quest connected young men to the spirit world, giving them the supernatural guidance they needed to become effective leaders. The giveaway ceremony, where successful warriors distributed their wealth to the poor and elderly, maintained social harmony by preventing the accumulation of excessive power by individuals. This was a civilization at its peak, confident, successful, adaptable, spiritually grounded. They had built something unprecedented in human history, a nomadic empire based on mobility, courage, and the perfect partnership between human and horse. Their warriors were legends among friend and enemy alike. Their women were renowned for their beauty, their artistic skill, their fierce independence. Their children grew up in a world where anything seemed possible if you were brave enough and skilled enough to take it. But empires, even the most successful ones, contain the seeds of their own challenges. The very success that had made the Lakota masters of the plains had also made them dependent on a way of life that required vast open spaces, enormous buffalo herds, and the absence of any force capable of matching their mobility and fighting ability. Now, in 1866, they faced something that challenged all three of those requirements. The iron horse was already crawling across their hunting grounds, bringing with it an endless stream of settlers, soldiers, and fortune-seekers. The buffalo herds were beginning to feel the pressure of systematic hunting by men with sharps rifles who killed for hides rather than meat. And in the valley below Fort Phil Kearny, a metal wagon with 6 bronze barrels had just demonstrated that individual warrior skill, the foundation of their entire military system, could be rendered meaningless by industrial technology. The lords of the Grassland Empire were about to discover whether the flexibility that had carried them through 3 centuries of challenges would be enough to survive contact with a civilization that didn't want to trade with them or fight them. According to the old rules, it wanted to replace them entirely. The horse had made them masters of the plains. The question now was whether being masters of the plains would mean anything when the plains themselves were being conquered by forces they had never encountered before. But here's what the soldiers at Fort Phil Kearny didn't understand, what the generals in Washington couldn't comprehend. They weren't dealing with primitives who would be intimidated by superior firepower. They were facing a people who had spent 300 years proving that adaptation and courage could overcome any obstacle, who had built an empire through intelligence and determination and absolute refusal to accept defeat. The metal wagon had spoken its piece. Now the horse people would show the world what 3 centuries of warfare evolution had created. The education was about to continue, and the teachers were about to learn some lessons of their own. The year 1862 brings the sound of hammers on iron spikes as the Union Pacific Railroad begins its inexorable march westward. Each spike driven into the prairie soil is like a nail in the coffin of the old world, the world where distance meant safety, where the horse people could retreat into the vastness of the plains whenever pressure mounted from the east. But while railroad crews work their way across Nebraska, something else is happening in Minnesota that will send shockwaves across the entire frontier. 4 young Santee Sioux men, hungry, frustrated by broken treaty promises, watching their people slowly starve on. Reservations where corrupt agents steal the food meant for their children, kill 5 white settlers near the town of Acton. Now here's the thing about moments like this, they're never really about the immediate incident. Those 4 young men didn't wake up on August 17th and decide to start a war. They were the final spark in a powder keg that had been building for years. Think about what the Dakota people in Minnesota were facing. They'd signed treaties, giving up most of their homeland in exchange for annuity payments, money and supplies that were supposed to keep them fed, while they learned to become farmers on the small reservations left to them. But the payments were always late, always smaller than promised. And the Indian agents grew rich, selling supplies meant for the tribes to white merchants instead. Andrew Myrick, a trader at the Lower Sioux Agency, became the face of this corruption when hungry Dakota came to him begging for food on credit. His response has echoed through history. If they are hungry, let them eat grass. Little Crow knew what those 4 young men's actions meant. He was no hothead. He'd been to Washington, had tried to work within the white man's system, understood better than most how overwhelmingly outnumbered his people were. But when the warriors came to him and said the die was cast, that white blood had been spilled, and there would be consequences regardless of what they did next, the old war leader made his choice. "We are only little herds of buffalo left scattered," he told the council. "The white men are like the locusts when they fly so thick that the whole sky is a snowstorm. But this is our country, and we will die fighting for it." The Dakota War of 1862 begins with all the fury of a prairie thunderstorm. Little Crow leads his warriors in desperate rebellion. But this isn't the old kind of plains warfare where individual skill and mobility could overcome superior numbers. The settlers have something new: telegraphs that can call for help instantly, railroads that can move troops faster than any horse, and early Gatling guns fresh from Civil War battlefields. The fighting is brutal. The Dakota, knowing this is their last chance, hit the settlements with everything they have. New Ulm burns. Fort Ridgely is besieged. For a brief, terrifying moment, it looks like the entire Minnesota frontier might collapse. White families flee eastward in panic, abandoning farms and towns to warriors who fight with the desperation of men who know they're already dead. But the Industrial Revolution doesn't just provide better weapons, it provides better logistics. Governor Alexander Ramsey can move troops by railroad and coordinate the response by telegraph in ways that would have been impossible just 20 years earlier. General Henry Sibley arrives with reinforcements armed with rifled muskets and supported by artillery. The Dakota warriors, magnificent as they are, can't stand against coordinated volleys from entrenched positions. The final battle at Wood Lake on September 23rd, 1862 demonstrates the new reality of warfare. The Dakota charge with traditional courage, but they're charging into rifle pits, defended by men who can reload faster than any bow can shoot, supported by cannon that tear holes in their ranks before they can close to fighting distance. Within hours, it's over. The aftermath is swift and merciless. Military tribunals convict 303 Dakota men in trials that sometimes last less than 5 minutes. President Lincoln commutes most of the sentences, but 38 men still hang in Mankato on December 26, 1862, the largest mass execution in American history, carried out the day after Christmas while crowds cheer and vendors sell peanuts like it's a county fair. Think about that image for a moment. 38 warriors who fought for their people's survival, dangling from gallows, while white families celebrate the holidays. Andrew Myrick, the trader who told hungry Indians to eat grass, is found dead with his mouth stuffed full of prairie grass. But the real message isn't in individual revenge. It's in those 38 bodies swaying in the winter wind. The survivors flee westward with stories that make every campfire gathering grim with foreboding. They bring word of the white man's new weapons, not just the Gatling guns, though those are terrifying enough, but the entire industrial machine that can mobilize overwhelming force faster than traditional warfare can respond to it. They tell of trials where no Dakota voice is heard, of executions carried out with mechanical precision, of a people who wage war not for honor or territory, but for complete extermination. Red Cloud, already in his 40s, and at the height of his powers as a strategic thinker, listens to these refugees with the careful attention of a general studying intelligence reports. He's been planning something unprecedented, an alliance that would unite not just the 7 bands of the Lakota, but their traditional enemies as well. The stories from Minnesota convince him that the time for old rivalries has passed. Through 1863 and 64, Red Cloud travels from camp to camp like a diplomat building a coalition. He smokes the sacred pipe with Northern Cheyenne leaders who have their own grievances against the whites. He meets with Arapaho chiefs who've watched their hunting grounds shrink year by year. He even reaches out to some Crow warriors, setting aside generations of warfare in the face of a common threat. The message he carries is simple but revolutionary. The whites pose a threat to all the free tribes, and only by standing together can any of them hope to survive. This isn't just about the Lakota anymore. It's about preserving a way of life that the industrial civilization seems determined to destroy. Meanwhile, in Hartford, Connecticut, a very different kind of revolution is taking place. Richard Jordan Gatling works obsessively on perfecting his mechanical gun, driven by a paradox that would be almost funny if the consequences weren't so deadly. Gatling genuinely believes that making war too terrible will make men abandon it altogether. In his mind, a weapon that can kill so efficiently that battles become slaughters will force humanity to choose peace. Dr. Gatling, he's a medical doctor as well as an inventor, sees his creation as ultimately humanitarian. If one machine gunner can do the work of 100 riflemen, then 99 men can stay home with their families instead of marching off to war. The fact that this logic could justify any level of mechanical slaughter apparently doesn't occur to him. Or perhaps he's so focused on the technical challenges that he doesn't think through the human consequences. The U.S. Army, initially skeptical of these coffee mill guns, begins to see their utility as reports filter back from early deployments. General Benjamin Butler uses them effectively during the siege of Petersburg, where they prove devastating against Confederate earthworks. The mechanical guns can maintain sustained fire that no amount of human courage can overcome, turning assaults into suicide missions. But it's the mobility question that really interests the frontier commanders. How do you deploy these weapons against an enemy that fights with speed and refuses to present concentrated targets? The early Gatling guns are heavy, require wheeled carriages, need level ground to operate effectively. They're perfect for siege warfare or defending fixed positions. But how do you use them against warriors who can appear and disappear like smoke? The answer, as it develops, is to use them as area denial weapons. Set up the Gatling guns to command key terrain, river crossings, passes through hills, approaches to forts, and force the enemy to either avoid those areas entirely or pay an impossible price to control them. It's a strategy that works perfectly against traditional European armies that need to hold ground to achieve their objectives. But the Plains tribes don't fight European-style campaigns. They raid, retreat, scatter, regroup. They don't need to hold terrain. They need to disrupt supply lines, capture livestock, inflict casualties while avoiding decisive battles. The question becomes whether the mechanical guns can adapt to this kind of warfare, or whether the warriors can develop tactics to neutralize their advantage. Young warriors like Crazy Horse and Gall are already thinking about these problems. They study how the whites fight, learn their patterns, look for weaknesses in their methods. They notice that the mechanical guns jam in dust and extreme cold. They observe that the weapons can't pursue fleeing targets. They see that gun crews become focused on operating their machines and may be vulnerable to skilled marksmen, but they also see the larger picture that's taking shape. The iron rails advancing mile by mile across the prairie, each mile bringing more soldiers, more supplies, more settlers. The talking wires, telegraph lines, that let the whites coordinate across vast distances in ways the tribes never could. The endless stream of manufactured goods flowing from eastern factories, replacing everything the whites lose faster than raids can destroy it. Sitting Bull, the hunk-papa holy man whose visions have guided his people through crisis after crisis, receives disturbing dreams during this period. He sees buffalo skulls piled like white mountains stretching to the horizon. He watches iron horses breathing black smoke as they devour the grass. He witnesses his people penned like cattle, their children speaking the white man's tongue, their sacred ceremonies forbidden by law. But the most disturbing vision shows warriors charging brave as eagles into mechanical thunder, their courage meaningless against the industrial storm that sweeps them away like leaves before a winter wind. Sitting Bull wakes from these dreams with tears on his face, knowing that the old world is ending, but not yet understanding what will replace it. The storm clouds are gathering on multiple fronts. In Washington, General William Tecumseh Sherman, fresh from his march through Georgia, begins planning campaigns that will apply the total war concepts he perfected against the Confederacy to the Indian problem. Sherman understands logistics, understands how to use railroads and telegraphs to coordinate large-scale operations, understands that victory comes not just from winning battles, but from destroying the enemy's ability to continue fighting. The Bozeman Trail, cutting through the heart of the Powder River country to reach the gold fields of Montana, becomes the flashpoint where all these forces will collide. The trail represents everything the treaty makers promised would never happen: white migration through the heart of Lakota territory, permanent military posts to protect that migration, the systematic disruption of the buffalo herds that sustain the free tribes. Red Cloud looks at this trail and sees not just an insult, but an existential threat. Let the whites establish this road, garrison it permanently, and the Lakota hunting grounds will be cut in half. The northern bands will be separated from the southern ones. The great buffalo herds will be divided and disrupted. The unity that's taken years to build among the allied tribes will become impossible to maintain. So Red Cloud makes his choice. The confederation he's built, Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, Arapaho, some Crow, will fight for the Bozeman Trail. Not raids or harassment, but a full-scale war to drive the whites out entirely and close the road forever. He doesn't know that Captain Nathaniel Williams is already at Fort Phil Kearny, setting up his Gatling gun and preparing to give that demonstration that will change everything. He doesn't know that Richard Gatling has just perfected the Model 1866 with improved reliability and faster rate of fire. He doesn't know that Sherman is planning to ship these weapons west in quantities sufficient to arm every major frontier post. The storm is finally ready to break. When it does, the thunder from the sky will compete with mechanical thunder from the earth, and the horse people will discover whether 3 centuries of military evolution has prepared them for warfare against the Industrial Revolution itself. The hammers continue pounding spikes into railroad ties, each blow echoing across the prairie like a countdown to apocalypse. The iron horse is coming, bringing with it the metal wagons that speak thunder, and the final test of whether courage and adaptability can survive the age of mechanical death. The education of both sides is about to become very, very expensive. December 21st, 1866. Dawn's bitter cold as Captain William Fetterman leads 80 men out of Fort Phil Kearny. The snow crunches under their boots. Their breath steams in the frigid air, and Fetterman is feeling confident. This is the same man who boasted he could ride through the entire Sioux nation with that number of soldiers. Today, he's about to get his chance to prove it. What Fetterman doesn't know is that Red Cloud has been planning this moment for months. Picture the scene from the Lakota perspective. For generations, their warfare has been built around individual prowess, personal courage, the kind of fluid tactics that turn every battle into an improvised dance between skilled warriors. But Red Cloud understands something that many of his contemporaries don't. The whites fight differently, and defeating them requires different methods. So instead of the traditional approach, warriors charging individually to count coup and win personal glory, Red Cloud has orchestrated something unprecedented in plains warfare. A coordinated ambush involving over 2,000 warriors from multiple tribes, all following a single strategic plan. The setup is brilliant in its simplicity. Young warriors, including Crazy Horse, act as decoys. They attack a wood-cutting detail near the fort, just like they've done dozens of times before. But this time, when the soldiers come out to rescue the woodcutters, the warriors don't fight and retreat randomly. They follow a script. Crazy Horse leads his small band in a carefully choreographed retreat, always staying just out of rifle range, always appearing to be on the verge of panic flight. To Fetterman, it looks like the same pattern he's seen before. A few warriors making a nuisance of themselves, running away as soon as serious force appears. Easy prey for disciplined soldiers, Fetterman takes the bait. The young warriors flee over Lodge Trail Ridge, and Fetterman follows with his 80 men, probably thinking this is going to be another routine pursuit of fleeing hostiles. The soldiers are well armed, Springfield rifles, plenty of ammunition, men who fought in the Civil War and know how to handle themselves in combat. But as they crest that ridge, Fetterman discovers that he's not chasing a small raiding party. He's walked into a trap that Red Cloud has spent months preparing. 2,000 warriors rise from the draws and gulches, where they've been waiting in absolute silence. Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, Arapaho, the alliance that Red Cloud has built through years of diplomacy and strategic planning. They surge up from hidden positions like a human avalanche, surrounding Fetterman's tiny command before the soldiers can even fully comprehend what's happening. Now here's where you see the difference between plains warfare at its peak and the kind of combat the soldiers are used to. This isn't a European-style battle with formations and coordinated volleys. It's not even typical Indian warfare with individual warriors fighting for personal glory. This is something new, a massive, coordinated assault that combines traditional plains mobility with unprecedented strategic planning. The soldiers try to form a defensive position, but there's nowhere to go. They're surrounded on open ground by warriors who know every rock, every gully, every fold in the terrain. The Lakota and their allies close in from all directions, using the landscape itself as a weapon. And here's what makes this battle so significant. It represents traditional plains warfare at its absolute apex. No Gatling guns are involved. No mechanical thunder to drown out the war cries. This is horse and lance and bow against rifle and bayonet. And the horse people are about to demonstrate exactly why they've been the masters of this terrain for generations. The fight lasts 40 minutes. When it's over, all 81 soldiers are dead, Fetterman himself among them, along with every man who followed him over that ridge. Most die in hand-to-hand combat, the kind of personal, brutal fighting that plains warriors have perfected over centuries of warfare. But here's what Red Cloud understands that many of his warriors don't. This victory, as complete as it is, represents both an apex and a turning point. This is traditional tactics working perfectly against traditional opponents. The question is whether traditional tactics will remain effective when the whites start bringing their mechanical thunder to bear. The answer comes swiftly and mechanically. General William Tecumseh. Sherman's response to the Fetterman massacre is exactly what you'd expect from a man who burned his way across Georgia. He wires his commanders that the Sioux must be exterminated or removed completely from the frontier. And he backs up that order with new weapons flowing west like an industrial river. The improved Gatling guns, model 1867 now, more reliable, faster firing, arrive at frontier posts, along with detailed instructions on their tactical employment against mobile enemies. The days when warriors could count on facing only single-shot rifles and occasional artillery are ending fast. Fort C.F. Smith, on August 1st, 1867, provides the first real test of how mechanical weapons perform against coordinated plains warfare. The Hayfield Fight, as it becomes known, pits 20 soldiers and 6 civilians against over 500 Cheyenne and Arapaho warriors, odds that would normally guarantee Indian victory, but the defenders aren't just hiding behind hastily built fortifications with traditional weapons. They have breech-loading rifles that can fire much faster than the old muzzle loaders, and they have something the warriors have never faced in these numbers before: a Gatling gun commanding clear fields of fire. The battle lasts 8 hours. Wave after wave of some of the finest light cavalry warriors in human history charge those fortifications, demonstrating courage that would make the heroes of ancient epics weep with admiration. But courage, no matter how absolute, can't overcome the mathematics of mechanical fire. The Gatling gun traverses back and forth like some iron demon, its operator simply turning the crank, left, right, while brass casings pile at his feet and the continuous stream of lead cuts down anything that moves in the killing zone. Warriors who have trained their entire lives to count coup, to ride close to enemies and demonstrate their bravery through personal risk. Discover that personal risk has become personal suicide. But the real shock comes the next day at Fort Phil Kearny, in what becomes known as the Wagon Box Fight. This is where Red Cloud himself takes direct command, leading an assault that includes his own son among the warriors. If anyone can find a way to overcome the mechanical guns through tactical brilliance and sheer force of will, it's the architect of the Fetterman victory. Captain James Powell has positioned his men in a defensive circle of wagon boxes, the beds of freight wagons arranged to create improvised fortifications. 2 Gatling guns command overlapping fields of fire, and the soldiers are armed with the new Spencer repeating rifles. It's a small force, maybe 30 men total, but they're equipped with the latest products of American industrial technology. Red Cloud studies the position and makes his plan. Multiple charges from different directions to overwhelm the defenders' ability to concentrate their fire. It's sound, tactical thinking that has worked countless times before against conventional opponents. But these aren't conventional opponents, and this isn't conventional warfare. The first charge goes in with all the magnificent fury that plains warfare can generate. Hundreds of warriors streaming across the prairie at full gallop, their war cries filling the air, eagle feathers and scalp locks streaming in the wind, lances and war clubs ready for close combat. It's a sight that has broken the nerve of enemies for generations. The Gatling guns open fire. Now I want you to really understand what happens next, because this is the moment when individual prowess meets industrial efficiency, and there's no contest. The mechanical guns don't aim at individual warriors. They sweep back and forth across entire areas, creating zones where nothing can live. Warriors who have spent their lives perfecting the art of mounted combat discover that all their skill means nothing if they can't get close enough to use it. The slaughter is systematic and impersonal. The gun crews, sweating despite the cool morning air, simply traverse their weapons back and forth while turning the cranks. The mathematics are simple. 600 rounds per minute per gun, continuous fire, overlapping fields that cover every approach to the wagon boxes. Warriors try everything their tactical experience suggests. Charges from multiple directions to divide the defender's attention, but the Gatling guns can shift targets faster than horses can change direction. Fire arrows to panic the soldiers and their animals, but the gun crews are too focused on their mechanical killing to be distracted by burning grass. Attempts to rush the guns during reloading, but the Model 1867 Gatling gun can maintain nearly continuous fire. Red Cloud himself leads one of the charges, his war horse pounding across the prairie toward those spitting bronze barrels. For a moment, traditional warfare and mechanical warfare face each other directly. The master strategist of the Plains nations charging into the muzzles of Richard Gatling's invention. But even Red Cloud's tactical genius and personal courage can't overcome the simple reality that his horse moves at 30 miles per hour while bullets move at over 1,000. The warriors finally withdraw, carrying their dead and wounded, leaving behind a battlefield that looks more like an industrial accident than a place where men fought for honor. Red Cloud, surveying the carnage, begins to understand that something fundamental has changed in the nature of warfare itself. This isn't about superior numbers or better tactics or greater courage. The mechanical guns have made all of those traditional factors irrelevant. A single machine, operated by one man, can hold off hundreds of warriors indefinitely. The mathematics of combat have been rewritten by industrial technology, and no amount of traditional military skill can solve this new equation. But here's what makes Red Cloud such a remarkable leader. He doesn't let despair or anger cloud his strategic thinking. Instead, he studies what happened, analyzes the mechanical gun's capabilities and limitations, and begins developing new approaches to the problem. He notices that the guns are most effective when they have clear fields of fire over level ground. They're less useful in rough terrain where warriors can use cover to close the distance. He observes that the weapons seem to jam occasionally in dust and extreme cold, requiring precious seconds to clear. He sees that the gun crews become completely focused on operating their machines, and may be vulnerable to skilled marksmen. Most importantly, he realizes that the mechanical guns are just one component of a larger system. They require ammunition, spare parts, trained operators. They need supply lines to keep them functioning, and those supply lines might be vulnerable to the kind of warfare Plains warriors understand best. Raids, harassment, attacks on isolated detachments. The traditional charge across open ground is finished. The wagon box fight has proven that conclusively. But that doesn't mean the war is over. It just means the war will have to be fought differently. Meanwhile, the soldiers at Fort Phil Kearny clean their Gatling guns and count their ammunition expenditure. Captain Powell writes his report, noting the effectiveness of mechanical weapons against massed cavalry charges. In Washington, General Sherman reads these reports with satisfaction, seeing confirmation that industrial firepower can solve the Indian problem efficiently and permanently. But the soldiers and the generals are making the same mistake that Europeans have made throughout history. When facing unfamiliar enemies, they're assuming that their opponents will continue using the same tactics that proved ineffective. They think the demonstration of Gatling gun superiority will discourage further attacks, that the warriors will be overawed by superior technology and submit to the inevitable march of progress. They have no understanding of the adaptive capacity that has made the Plains tribes successful for centuries. They don't realize they're dealing with people who transformed themselves from woodland deer hunters into mounted lightning, who learned to use horses and guns while remaining essentially themselves, who have survived every challenge through flexibility and refusal to accept defeat. Red Cloud rides back to his camp with his surviving warriors, and the conversation around the fires that night is unlike any in Plains history. The old men, who remember when warfare was about individual courage and personal honor, listen to descriptions of mechanical death that their ancient language can barely express. The young warriors who charged into those mechanical guns and lived to tell about it speak in hushed voices about the sound of continuous thunder, about watching their friends cut down by invisible death, but there's no talk of surrender. There's anger, yes. Grief for the dead, absolutely. But also the kind of grim determination that has carried the horse people through 3 centuries of challenges. The mechanical guns have spoken their piece, but the conversation is far from over. The education continues, and the teachers are learning that their students are more resourceful than they ever imagined. The next phase of this deadly curriculum is about to begin, And both sides are going to discover new things about the relationship between courage and technology, between individual skill and industrial power, between the ancient art of war and the mechanical science of killing. The blood along the Bozeman Trail has taught everyone involved that the old rules no longer apply. Now they have to write new ones. And the writing is going to be done in blood and gunpowder and the screams of men and horses caught between two different concepts of what warfare means. The metal wagons have had their say. Now it's time to see what the horse people have learned from listening. The Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868 appears at first glance to be Red Cloud's victory. The army abandons the Bozeman Trail forts, Forts Phil Kearny, C.F. Smith and Reno, exactly as he demanded. The Lakota promptly burn them to the ground in celebration, sending columns of black smoke into the sky as a signal that traditional diplomacy, backed by military pressure, can still work. Red Cloud himself touches the pen to the treaty document, becoming the only Indian leader in American history to win a war and dictate terms to the United States government. For a moment, it looks like the horse people have found a way to coexist with the industrial age on their own terms. But here's the thing about treaties written by lawyers and politicians. They always contain poison pills, clauses that seem reasonable on the surface but transform into nooses when conditions change. The Fort Laramie Treaty establishes the Great Sioux Reservation, a massive area covering most of present-day South Dakota, and designates unceded territory in the Powder River country, where the Lakota can hunt so long as the buffalo range therein in sufficient numbers to justify the chase. That last phrase is going to haunt everyone involved. The treaty also includes provisions that most of the chiefs either don't understand or choose to ignore, requirements that all Sioux children attend white schools, promises that the tribes will transition to farming within a reasonable time. Most ominously, a clause stating that no future treaties will be valid unless signed by 3/4 of all adult male Sioux, a requirement that makes it virtually impossible to legally modify the agreement, but also makes it equally difficult for the government to claim legitimacy for future land cessions. Red Cloud, perhaps understanding the trap but seeing no viable alternative, makes his choice. The alternative to this treaty is continued warfare against an enemy that has proven it can bring overwhelming firepower to bear anywhere the Lakota choose to fight. At least the treaty preserves some form of independence, some space where the old ways can continue. But Crazy Horse refuses to sign. So does Sitting Bull. So do most of the younger war leaders who've seen what Gatling guns can do to charging warriors. They keep their bands in the Powder River country, maintaining the traditional life, rejecting any accommodation, with a civilization that seems determined to destroy everything that makes them who they are. The split in Lakota leadership reflects a deeper question that indigenous peoples worldwide face when confronted by industrial civilizations. Is it better to compromise and hope to preserve something of the old ways, or to resist completely and risk losing everything? Red Cloud chooses compromise. Sitting Bull chooses resistance. Both are gambling with the survival of their people, and both know it. The Transcontinental Railroad is completed in 1869, and with it comes a change that Red Cloud, for all his strategic brilliance, probably didn't fully anticipate. The Iron Horse doesn't just bring soldiers and settlers, it brings buffalo hunters. Professional hide hunters armed with Sharps rifles begin the systematic destruction of the great herds. These aren't Indians hunting for meat and materials to sustain their families. These are industrial killers who shoot buffalo by the hundreds, take only the hides, and leave the carcasses to rot on the plains. They can kill more buffalo in a day than a traditional hunting party could process in a month. Think about what this means for that clause in the Fort Laramie Treaty. The government promised the Lakota could hunt in the unceded territory so long as the buffalo ranged therein in sufficient numbers. But what happens when there are no buffalo left to range anywhere? The treaty becomes void through environmental destruction rather than military conquest, a more effective weapon against the horse people than any Gatling gun. General Philip Sheridan understands this perfectly. When Texas ranchers complain about the buffalo hunters, Sheridan tells them to leave the hunters alone. Let them kill, skin, and sell until the buffalo is exterminated, he says. Then your prairies can be covered with speckled cattle and the festive cowboy, who follows the hunter as a second forerunner of an advanced civilization. It's genocide through ecological warfare, and it's more efficient than anything the army has managed with direct military action. Meanwhile, the reservation system begins its slow strangulation of the agency Indians, those who accepted the treaty and moved onto the designated lands. Corrupt Indian agents steal supplies while issuing rotten meat and moldy flour to people who once commanded the richest hunting grounds on the continent. Warriors who once rode hundreds of miles in a week now pace the boundaries of their confinement like caged eagles, their spirit horses idle, their traditional skills becoming useless memories. Some adapt to this new reality. Red Cloud learns English, travels to Washington multiple times, tries to work within the system to protect his people's interests. He discovers that the white world is even more complex and dangerous than he imagined. A place where words on paper matter more than honor, where politicians promise anything to avoid immediate problems and then claim they never made those promises when circumstances change. Others resist in whatever ways they can. Young warriors slip away from the agencies to join Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull in the unceded territory. They raid supply trains, attack surveying parties, harass military patrols, not because they expect to win a decisive victory, but because resistance itself has become a form of spiritual necessity. Sitting Bull emerges during this period as more than just a war leader. He becomes the spiritual center of the resistance. His sun dances, drawing thousands of people who hunger for the old ways. The sun dance involves warriors piercing their chest muscles with wooden skewers, then dancing while tethered to a central pole until the skewers tear free. A ritual that demonstrates that there are things more important than physical pain, more significant than individual comfort. When Sitting Bull dances, hanging from those skewers while staring directly into the sun, he's not just demonstrating personal courage. He's showing his people that their spiritual traditions can survive contact with industrial civilization, that there are forms of power that Gatling guns can't touch. But the sun dance also becomes a form of military planning. Warriors from dozens of bands gather for the ceremony, sharing information about troop movements, discussing strategy, coordinating their scattered resistance efforts. The spiritual and the military blend together in ways that completely confuse white officials, who can't understand how religious ceremonies become councils of war. Then, in 1874, everything changes again. George Armstrong Custer leads an expedition into the Black Hills, the Paha Sapa, the center of the world for the Lakota people. Ostensibly, it's a scientific expedition to map the region and establish a military post. Actually, it's a gold hunting expedition. And when Custer's geologists find gold, the news explodes across the nation like dynamite. The Black Hills are sacred to the Lakota in ways that whites struggle to understand. These aren't just hunting grounds or strategic territory. They're the place where the spirits dwell, where vision quests reach their climax, where the connection between the human world and the world beyond becomes tangible. Asking the Lakota to sell the Black Hills is like asking Christians to auction off heaven, but gold changes everything. Within months, thousands of miners flood illegally into the hills, while the army makes token efforts to remove them. The government finds itself in an impossible position, legally bound by treaty to keep whites out of Lakota territory, but politically unable to use military force against American citizens seeking their fortune. The solution, as always, is to blame the Indians. Government commissioners arrive to negotiate the purchase of the Black Hills, offering $6 million for land that everyone knows contains far more wealth than that. The negotiations take place in the shadow of a major military buildup. with troops positioned around the council grounds in a display of force that makes the government's intentions clear. Sitting Bull speaks for the resistance faction, and his words echo across history. "I want you to know that I do not propose to sell any land to the government." He places a pinch of dust between his fingers and adds, "Not even as much as this. But the government has already decided that negotiation is just a formality." When the Lakota refuse to sell, officials in Washington declare that the treaties have been violated by continuing Indian raids from the unceded territory. Never mind that these raids are responses to white invasion of sacred lands, or that the treaty specifically allows the Lakota to live in the unceded territory. The legal justification is manufactured to fit the predetermined conclusion. On December 3, 1875, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs issues an ultimatum. All Sioux must report to their designated agencies by January 31, 1876, or be considered hostile and subject to military action. The deadline is deliberately impossible to meet. January is the coldest month on the northern plains, when temperatures drop to 40 degrees below zero and blizzards can last for days. Moving entire camps with children and elderly people across hundreds of miles of frozen wilderness is not just difficult, it's often fatal. The government knows this, counts on it, uses the weather itself as a weapon. Most of the free bands ignore the ultimatum completely. They're living where the treaty says they have a right to live, hunting where the treaty says they have a right to hunt. If the government wants to fight about that, let them come to the Powder River country in winter and see how their mechanical guns work when the metal becomes so cold it burns human flesh. January 31st comes and goes. The deadline passes while most of the hostile bands are still scattered across their winter camps, some of them completely unaware that an ultimatum has even been issued. The government declares them to be in violation of federal authority and turns the matter over to the War Department. General Philip Sheridan, commander of the Division of the Missouri, plans a three-pronged campaign designed to crush the holdouts once and for all. Columns converging from three directions will sweep the Powder River country clean, driving any survivors onto the reservations where they can be controlled and monitored. With the armies come the improved Gatling guns, the Model 1874 with 10 barrels capable of firing a theoretical 1,000 rounds per minute. The mechanical thunder that devastated warriors at the Wagon box fight has been refined and multiplied, turned into a systematic tool for the destruction of mobile resistance. But Sheridan and his subordinates are making a critical assumption that will prove almost fatal. They assume the scattered winter camps will remain scattered, that traditional rivalries will prevent unified resistance, that the demonstration of superior firepower will collapse Indian morale as it did in previous campaigns. They have no idea that Sitting Bull's spiritual leadership has created something unprecedented in plains warfare, a coalition that transcends tribal boundaries, united not by traditional alliance systems, but by shared recognition that this is their last chance to preserve any version of the old life. The Sundancers of 1875 have drawn warriors from across the northern plains. Lakota, Northern Cheyenne, some Arapaho, even a few Crow, who've decided that tribal enemies matter less than the common threat. They've shared information, coordinated planning, prepared for exactly the kind of campaign that Sheridan is organizing. More importantly, they've studied the lessons of the Wagon box fight and similar encounters. They know they can't charge directly into Gatling gun positions, but they also know that the mechanical guns are just one component of a larger system, a system that depends on supply lines, ammunition trains, predictable tactics, and the assumption that Indian resistance will follow familiar patterns. The noose is tightening. But the prey has been studying the hunter, Crazy Horse, now in his 30s and at the peak of his tactical brilliance, has been developing new approaches to warfare against mechanized enemies. Instead of the traditional charge across open ground, he's perfecting techniques of ambush and mobility that use the landscape itself as a weapon. Instead of seeking decisive battles, he's planning to make the entire campaign so costly in men and materials that the government will reconsider its strategy. Sitting Bull continues his role as spiritual leader, but he's also becoming something like a supreme commander. Coordinating resistance across hundreds of miles of territory, his vision quests reveal strategies as well as spiritual guidance, and his ability to inspire absolute loyalty gives the scattered bands something they've never had before: unified command. The stage is set for the final examination in this deadly curriculum. On one side, the full industrial might of the United States, backed by railroads and telegraphs, supported by mechanical weapons that can kill faster than any human skill can counter. On the other side, the most formidable light cavalry in human history, led by tactical geniuses who've spent their entire lives adapting to impossible challenges. The government thinks it's launching a routine campaign to crush the last remnants of primitive resistance. The warriors know they're fighting for something more than military victory. They're fighting for the right to exist as themselves, to maintain some connection to a way of life that stretches back to the beginning of time. The winter of 1875 to 1876 passes in preparation on both sides. In military posts across the frontier, officers study maps and plan logistics while mechanics service Gatling guns and count ammunition stores. In scattered camps across the Powder River country, warriors prepare for war while medicine men seek visions of what's coming. Spring will bring the final test of whether courage and adaptability can survive the age of mechanical warfare, whether the horse people can find a way to outlive the technology that seems designed to destroy them. The noose is ready. The question is whether those caught in it can turn the trap against the trappers themselves. The education is about to reach its climax, and both teachers and students are going to learn things they never expected about the relationship between old wisdom and new weapons, between spiritual power and industrial might, between the ancient art of war and the modern science of systematic killing. The mechanical thunder is coming to the Powder River country, and when it arrives, it's going to discover that the horse people have been listening very carefully to everything it's taught them. 1890 brings word from the Nevada desert that changes everything, or seems to. A Paiute prophet named Wovoka has died and returned with a message that spreads across the western tribes like wildfire. The world will renew itself, he promises. The buffalo will return in endless herds. The dead will rise and walk among the living again. The whites will vanish like morning mist, blown away by the breath of the Great Spirit. All the people need to do is perform the ghost dance. Think about what this message means to the Lakota in 1890. It's been 14 years since the Little Bighorn. 14 years since Custer's defeat gave them one last taste of the old victories. Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse are both dead now. Sitting Bull killed by Indian police in 1890, Crazy Horse bayoneted by a guard at Fort Robinson in 1877. The great chiefs who once made the earth tremble with their war parties are gone, and their people are starving on reservations where corrupt agents steal the food meant for their children. The buffalo are gone too. Where millions once darkened the plains, now there are only bones, white mountains of skulls and ribs that fertilizer companies buy by the ton. The hunting grounds that sustained the horse people for generations have been carved up into cattle ranches and wheat farms. The sacred Black Hills echo, with the sound of mining equipment instead of vision quests. The Lakota, who hear Wovoka's message, are desperate people clinging to the last threads of hope. The ghost dance offers them something no politician or Indian agent has been able to provide. A future where being Lakota means something again. Where their children will grow up in a world where courage and spiritual power matter more than mechanical efficiency. So they dance. By the thousands they dance, Kicking Bear and Short Bull, two Lakota men who traveled to Nevada to meet the prophet personally, return as apostles of the new religion. They bring with them detailed instructions on how to perform the ceremony, what songs to sing, how to prepare the sacred ghost shirts that will protect the dancers from all harm, including bullets from the white man's guns. The ghost shirts are painted with sacred symbols revealed in visions: eagles, buffalo, sacred pipes, lightning bolts. The dancers believe these shirts will turn aside any weapon, even the bullets from Gatling guns. They've incorporated the mechanical thunder they've faced into their spiritual cosmology, transforming it from a symbol of defeat into just another obstacle that faith can overcome. Picture these dances as they spread across the northern plains in the summer and fall of 1890. Great circles of men and women moving slowly clockwise, singing the hypnotic songs that Wagon taught his disciples. They dance for hours, sometimes for days, until exhaustion and spiritual ecstasy combine to produce visions of the world that's coming. Many of the dancers fall into trances where they visit dead relatives, in a place where the grass is always green and the buffalo herds stretch to the horizon. They see their children playing in camps where the tipis are made of clouds and the horses run faster than the wind. They talk with Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, who tell them to keep faith, that the time of renewal is close at hand. The dances harm no one. The dancers make no threats, launch no raids, attack no settlements. This is a purely spiritual movement focused on internal renewal rather than external resistance. But their unity terrifies white officials who have spent decades trying to keep the tribes divided and controllable. Agent James McLaughlin at Standing Rock is particularly alarmed by Sitting Bull's role in the movement. The old holy man, now in his 50s and living quietly on the reservation, initially views the ghost dance with skepticism. He's seen too many promised deliverances fail, watched too many sacred movements crushed by practical realities. But when his people beg him to at least allow the dancing in his camp, Sitting Bull gives his permission. That permission is enough to seal his fate. McLaughlin has been trying to undermine Sitting Bull's influence for years, seeing the old chief as an obstacle to the progress that will turn Lakota warriors into Christian farmers. The ghost dance gives him the excuse he's been looking for. In his reports to Washington, McLaughlin describes Sitting Bull as the leader of a dangerous religious movement that threatens to ignite another Indian war. The Army, still traumatized by memories of the Little Bighorn, takes these reports seriously. General Nelson Miles, who commanded the forces that finally cornered Sitting Bull's band in 1881, argues for immediate action before the ghost dance movement can spread further. On December 15, 1890, 43 Indian police arrive at Sitting Bull's cabin before dawn. Their orders are to arrest the old chief and transport him to Fort Yates, where military authorities can keep him under control until the ghost dance hysteria passes. But Sitting Bull's followers aren't going to let their spiritual leader be taken without a fight. What happens? Next is chaos, the kind of violent confusion that erupts when different groups with irreconcilable objectives collide in a space too small to contain their conflict. The Indian police, trying to follow orders while avoiding a bloodbath, find themselves caught between their duty to the government and their respect for a man many of them still consider a living legend. Sitting Bull's supporters, awakened by the commotion, rush from their cabins to defend their chief. Some are armed, others carry only their hands and their anger. But all of them understand that this is the moment when compromise ends and choices have to be made. In the growing daylight, as more people gather and tensions escalate beyond any possibility of peaceful resolution, Sitting Bull himself makes the choice that determines everything that follows. He could go quietly, submit to arrest, let the authorities sort out the legal questions later. Instead, he resists. The shooting starts, and once it starts, it can't be stopped. Lieutenant Bullhead, the leader of the Indian police, puts his gun to Sitting Bull's head. Sitting Bull's rifle kills Bullhead, even as Bullhead's bullet kills Sitting Bull. Sergeant Red Tomahawk shoots Sitting Bull in the back of the head to make sure he's dead. The great holy man dies in his own dooryard while his people fight and die around him. And in the middle of this tragedy, something almost surreal happens. Sitting Bull's old show horse from Buffalo Bill's Wild West show, trained to perform tricks at the sound of gunfire, begins to dance and rear and paw the air as bullets fly and men scream, and it's a grotesque finale to a legendary life. The man who once made the earth shake with his war parties dies while his circus horse performs for an audience of corpses and mourners. But Sitting Bull's death doesn't end the ghost dance movement. If anything, it intensifies the dancing, as his followers interpret his martyrdom as proof that the renewal is close at hand. His supporters flee south toward Pine Ridge, carrying word of his death and their own desperation to anyone who will listen. They find Chief Bigfoot's band of Minneconjou Lakota camped along Wounded Knee Creek, still dancing the ghost dance, still hoping for the world that Wovoka promised. Bigfoot himself is sick with pneumonia, but his people continue the ceremonies while soldiers of the 7th Cavalry, Custer's old regiment, burning for revenge after 14 years, surround their camp. 4 Hotchkiss guns, the evolved descendants of Richard Gatling's invention, capable of firing explosive shells at 50 rounds per minute, position themselves on a hill overlooking the camp. The guns command perfect fields of fire across the entire area, where 350 Lakota men, women and children huddle in their tipis, trying to stay warm in the bitter December cold. On the morning of December 29th, 1890, the soldiers attempt to disarm Bigfoot's band. It's a routine procedure that's been carried out dozens of times before at agencies across the West. The Indians surrender their guns. The soldiers conduct their search. Everyone goes home. Simple, but nothing about this situation is simple. The dancers are wearing their ghost shirts, believing themselves protected from bullets. The soldiers are nervous, jumpy, aware that they're outnumbered and surrounded by people who might be planning treachery. The Hotchkiss guns on the hill are loaded and ready. Their crews trained and alert. Yellow Bird, an elderly medicine man, begins to dance and throw dust in the air, reminding the warriors that their ghost shirts will turn aside any bullets. His chanting grows louder, more insistent, as the tension in the camp builds toward an explosion that no one can prevent and everyone can see coming. A rifle fires. Maybe it's accidental, a nervous soldier with his finger on the trigger, a warrior making one last gesture of defiance, someone stumbling and discharging their weapon by mistake. Maybe it's deliberate. At this point, it doesn't matter. The sound of that single shot releases all the fear and anger and desperation that has been building for years. The Hotchkiss guns open up. Now here's what you have to understand about what happens next. This isn't the controlled demonstration of mechanical firepower that Captain Williams conducted at Fort Phil Kearny 24 years earlier. This isn't even the coordinated defensive fire of the Wagon box fight, where soldiers used their weapons to repel attacking warriors. This is indiscriminate slaughter, industrial killing applied to a defenseless population at point-blank range. The Hotchkiss guns fire explosive shells into the teepees where families huddle together. Each shell detonates in a blast of shrapnel that kills or maims everyone within 20 feet. The gun crews traverse their weapons back and forth, systematically destroying everything in the camp: men, women, children, horses, dogs, the teepees themselves. Warriors try to fight back, but their traditional weapons are useless against exploding shells fired from protected positions. A few have rifles, but individual marksmanship means nothing when you're facing 4 machine guns with overlapping fields of fire. The ghost shirts that were supposed to turn aside bullets prove as ineffective against high explosives as any other clothing. Families try to run, fleeing across the frozen ground toward a ravine that might offer some protection. The Hotchkiss guns pursue them, the gunners cranking their weapons to follow the fleeing figures, cutting them down as they run. Women carrying infants stumble and fall as shells explode around them. Children who wander confused through the smoke are shot by soldiers who've lost all sense of proportion or restraint. The mechanical thunder continues for what seems like hours, but is probably only minutes. 50 rounds per minute per gun, 200 rounds per minute total, each round an explosive shell designed to kill everything within its blast radius. The mathematics of slaughter applied with industrial precision to people whose only crime was believing in a future where they could be themselves again. When the guns finally fall silent, nearly 300 Lakota lie dead or dying in the snow. More than half are women and children. Their ghost shirts are torn and blood-soaked, their sacred symbols obliterated by shrapnel and gore. The tipis burn, sending black smoke into the winter sky like funeral pyres for an entire way of life. The soldiers collect 20 medals of honor for this action. 20 medals for what amounts to a turkey shoot, for killing people who posed no military threat, for using mechanical weapons against families armed with nothing more dangerous than faith and desperation. The bodies are photographed for posterity, then dumped in a mass grave while a blizzard covers the blood with fresh snow. The ghost dance movement dies with them, its promise of renewal revealed as just another false hope in a history full of broken promises. But the story doesn't end in that mass grave at Wounded Knee. Some of the dancers survive. People like Dewey Beard, who loses his wife and child in the massacre, but lives to see his grandsons ship overseas to fight in World War I. There, on the battlefields of France, they face the Gatling guns, evolved descendant, the Maxim machine gun, in the trenches where industrial warfare reaches its ultimate expression. Native American soldiers earn disproportionate honors in that war, their traditional warrior culture channeling itself into modern combat with devastating effectiveness. They prove, if proof were still needed, that their courage required no vindication from anyone. The same people who were massacred at Wounded Knee for believing in spiritual renewal become some of America's most decorated soldiers when given the chance to fight on equal terms. The metal wagons themselves become museum pieces, their brass barrels polished by curators rather than gun crews. Richard Gatling's invention spawns a dynasty of mechanical death. The Maxim gun that enables European conquest of Africa, the Vickers gun that defines World War I, eventually the miniguns of Vietnam that fire 6,000 rounds per minute. Each generation of warriors faces the latest iteration of mechanical killing, from colonial subjects to modern insurgents, courage always meeting industrial efficiency, individual skill always confronting mass production. The technology evolves, grows more sophisticated, more deadly, more efficient. But the fundamental equation remains the same: flesh and blood against metal and mathematics, traditional courage against mechanical indifference. At Pine Ridge and Rosebud, Standing Rock and Cheyenne River, the descendants of those who faced the first metal wagons maintain their ceremonies, speak their language, honor their ancestors. The sacred hoop, as Black Elk prophesied after surviving Wounded Knee as a young man, was broken but not destroyed. The Sundance, banned for 50 years after the massacre, returns. The language, nearly beaten out of children in boarding schools designed to kill the Indian to save the man, is taught again in tribal colleges. Artists paint warriors facing Gatling guns not as victims, but as defenders of a way of life worth defending. The horse culture could not survive the industrial age, but the spirit that created it adapts and endures, finding new expressions for ancient truths about courage and community and the connection between human beings and the sacred world. In the summer powwows, when the drums beat and dancers circle in patterns as old as the grass itself, the thunder that once came from mechanical barrels is answered by the older thunder of tradition. The metal wagons spoke their peace and fell silent, but the people they were meant to destroy remain. Their greatest victory not counted in coups or scalps, but in survival itself. The prairie grass still bends under the same wind that carried the smoke of that first Gatling gun demonstration. And in that wind, Those who listen can hear the echo of warriors who mocked the metal wagon until its thunder spoke, and who found a way to outlive the silence that followed. The mechanical death machine had its moment, but the dance goes on, and the songs remember everything: the courage, the tragedy, the endurance that turns defeat into a different kind of victory. The ghost shirts failed to stop the bullets, but the spirit they represented proved stronger than any machine ever built. The dance of ghosts became a dance of survival, and in the end, that may be the only victory that really matters. The frozen bodies at Wounded Knee are photographed, catalogued, and dumped in a mass grave while a blizzard covers the blood with fresh snow. The 7th Cavalry receives 20 medals of honor for the massacre, 20 medals for what amounts to shooting fish in a barrel, for using machine guns against families whose only weapons were faith and desperation. The frontier is declared officially closed in 1890. The Indian problem is considered solved through a combination of Gatling gunfire, starvation, and systematic cultural destruction. In Washington, politicians congratulate themselves on bringing civilization to the wilderness. In Hartford, Richard Gatling's company ships the latest models of his mechanical gun to colonial administrators around the world, spreading industrial death to every continent where traditional warriors still resist the march of modern efficiency. But here's the thing about declaring problem solved. Reality has a way of refusing to cooperate with official pronouncements. The story doesn't end in that mass grave. The education continues, and both teachers and students keep learning lessons that no one expected when Captain Williams first cranked his mechanical gun on the ridge above Fort Phil Kearny. Dewey Beard survives Wounded Knee, loses his wife and child to the Hotchkiss guns, carries the memories of that December morning for the rest of his long life. But he also lives to see something that would have seemed impossible in 1890, his grandsons shipping overseas to fight in the Great War, where they face the Gatling, guns evolved descendant in the trenches of France. The Maxim machine gun that dominates the Western Front is Richard Gatling's invention, perfected by industrial engineering and mass production. Where Gatling's gun could fire 400 rounds per minute, the Maxim delivers 600. Where the early mechanical guns jammed frequently and required constant maintenance, the Maxim is reliable enough to fire for hours without stopping. Where Gatling guns needed multiple operators, the Maxim can be served by a single gunner, but the fundamental equation remains the same: courage meeting mechanical efficiency, individual skill confronting mass production, traditional warrior values colliding with industrial indifference to human life. Native American soldiers earned disproportionate honors in that war. The same people who were massacred at Wounded Knee for believing in spiritual renewal become some of America's most decorated soldiers when given the chance to fight on equal terms. They bring traditional warrior skills to modern combat: the ability to move silently, to read terrain, to maintain courage under fire, to accept casualties without breaking. More importantly, they prove something that the architects of the reservation system never understood: that warrior traditions aren't about primitive savagery or hopeless resistance to progress. They're about maintaining dignity and purpose under impossible circumstances, about finding meaning in struggle even when victory seems impossible. The Lakota code talkers of World War I used their native language to communicate battlefield information that German intelligence can't decipher. The same language that Indian agents tried to beat out of children in boarding schools becomes a strategic asset in modern warfare. The culture that was supposed to disappear transforms itself into something that industrial civilization needs to survive its own conflicts. But the pattern continues beyond the trenches of France. The metal wagons evolve, grow more sophisticated, more deadly. The Vickers gun that succeeds the Maxim, the machine guns that dominate World War II, the mini-guns of Vietnam that fire 6,000 rounds per minute, rates of fire that would have seemed like magic to Captain Williams and his Model 1866 Gatling gun, each generation of warriors faces the latest iteration, from colonial subjects fighting European empires to modern insurgents confronting superpower militaries. The technology changes, but the fundamental dynamic remains constant: traditional courage adapting to industrial killing power, individual skill learning to survive mechanical efficiency. In Algeria, Berber warriors discover the same lessons that Red Cloud learned at the Wagon box fight. You can't charge machine gun positions across open ground and expect to live. In Vietnam, jungle fighters develop the same tactics that Crazy Horse pioneered: mobility, ambush, making the enemy's superior firepower work against itself by forcing fights in terrain where mechanical advantages become liabilities. The ghost shirts fail every time, but the spirit they represent proves remarkably durable. Not the naive belief that faith can stop bullets, but the deeper understanding that some things are worth dying for, that dignity matters more than survival, that maintaining your identity under pressure is its own form of victory. The Gatling gun and its descendants enable the European conquest of Africa, the colonial subjugation of Asia, the systematic destruction of indigenous peoples on every continent. But they also create the conditions for their own obsolescence. Industrial warfare becomes so destructive that it forces the development of new technologies: radar, jet aircraft, guided missiles, nuclear weapons, that make machine guns as obsolete as stone axes. Meanwhile, the people who face the first mechanical thunder adapt in ways their enemies never anticipated. At Pine Ridge and Standing Rock, Rosebud and Cheyenne River, the survivors maintain their ceremonies in secret, teach their language to children in hidden schools, keep alive the traditions that were supposed to die with the last free chiefs. The Sundance, banned for 50 years after Wounded Knee, returns in the 1950s and 60s. The piercing rituals that Sitting Bull used to demonstrate spiritual power over physical pain become symbols of cultural survival. Proof that some forms of strength can't be destroyed by any weapon ever invented. The language, nearly lost after generations of forced assimilation, is taught again in tribal colleges, founded by the grandchildren of warriors who faced Gatling guns. Young people who grow up watching television and using computers learn the ancient words for buffalo and eagle, for courage and honor, for the sacred relationship between human beings and the natural world. Artists begin painting warriors facing machine guns not as victims of technological superiority, but as heroes defending something precious against overwhelming odds. The horse culture that couldn't survive the industrial age becomes a symbol of resistance to everything that industrial culture represents: mechanization over humanity, efficiency over dignity, progress over wisdom. But here's the deepest irony of this entire story: the very qualities that made the Plains warriors so formidable against traditional enemies also make them remarkably effective at surviving in the modern world. The adaptability that transformed woodland deer hunters into mounted lightning. The flexibility that incorporated horses and guns without losing essential identity. The absolute refusal to accept defeat even when defeat seems inevitable. These same qualities help reservation communities survive poverty and discrimination, help Native students succeed in universities designed by and for white culture, help traditional knowledge find new applications in fields like environmental science and sustainable agriculture. The warrior tradition evolves, but it doesn't disappear. The mechanical guns themselves become museum pieces, their brass barrels polished by curators who explain their historical significance to tourists who've never seen combat. But the lessons they taught continue to resonate through every conflict where technological superiority confronts human determination. In Iraq and Afghanistan, American soldiers discover what British colonials learned in the 19th century: that superior firepower doesn't automatically translate into political victory, that traditional cultures can absorb incredible punishment and continue resisting, that the human spirit has resources that no machine can quantify or counter. Insurgents. armed with improvised explosive devices. And small arms learn the same lessons that Crazy Horse mastered: how to make technological superiority work against itself, how to turn an enemy's strengths into weaknesses, how to survive by refusing to fight on the enemy's terms. The drone warfare that dominates 21st century conflict represents the ultimate evolution of Gatling's vision: killing without human contact. Death delivered by operators sitting in air-conditioned trailers thousands of miles from their targets. It's mechanical warfare perfected, the complete separation of killing from human emotion or moral consequence. But even drones can't solve the fundamental problem that has plagued industrial warfare since that first demonstration at Fort Phil Kearny. You can kill people with machines, but you can't kill ideas, can't destroy cultures, can't mechanize the human need for dignity and purpose and identity. The sacred hoop that Black Elk saw in his visions, the circle that connects all life, that was broken at Wounded Knee but not destroyed, continues to turn. The prophecies speak of a time when the wisdom of indigenous peoples will be needed to heal the damage that industrial civilization has inflicted on the earth itself. Climate change, environmental destruction, the spiritual emptiness that comes with treating everything as a commodity to be bought and sold. These are challenges that mechanical solutions can't address. Problems that require the kind of wisdom that warrior traditions have always embodied. In summer powwows across the northern plains, when the drums beat and dancers circle in patterns as old as the grass, the thunder that once came from mechanical barrels is answered by the older thunder of tradition. The songs remember everything: the courage, the tragedy, the endurance that turns defeat into a different kind of victory. Young people in traditional regalia dance the same steps their ancestors danced before the horse, before the gun, before the metal wagons that spoke mechanical thunder. But they also dance with the knowledge that their great-great-grandparents faced the ultimate test of cultural survival and passed it on to them. The prairie grass still bends under the same wind that carried the smoke from that first Gatling gun demonstration. In that wind, those who listen can hear the voices of warriors who mocked the metal wagon until its thunder spoke, who learned to respect its power but refused to surrender to it, who found ways to outlive the machinery designed to destroy them. Red Cloud's strategic brilliance lives on in tribal leaders who navigate the complexities of federal law and modern politics. Crazy Horse's tactical genius influences military officers who study his campaigns in war colleges around the world. Sitting Bull's spiritual strength inspires activists and artists who carry forward the work of cultural preservation and renewal. The metal wagons had their say, spoke their piece in thunder and smoke and the screams of dying horses. But the people they were meant to silence are still here, still singing the old songs, still teaching the ancient ways to children who will face challenges that no Gatling gun can solve. In the end, that may be the most important lesson of this entire bloody curriculum: that mechanical death can kill bodies but not spirits, can destroy cultures but not the human capacity to create new ones, can win battles but not the war between efficiency and dignity, between progress and wisdom, between the machine and the soul. The education continues, and the teachers are still learning that their students are tougher, smarter, and more resourceful than any lesson plan anticipated. The echoes of that first mechanical thunder still reverberate through every conflict, where traditional values confront industrial power, where human courage faces mechanical indifference, where the ancient wisdom of warrior peoples challenges the modern assumption that newer is always better. The dance goes on, the songs remember, and the sacred hoop continues to turn, connecting past and future in an unbroken circle that no machine will ever be strong enough to destroy.